religiously motivated peacemakers, peace builders. I think probably many people in the room are curious about the relationship between a secular approach and a religiously motivated approach, because I know that that's very distinct to the Tanenbaum Center's work and to the selection of the peacemakers. And maybe you could both, I know you both touched on it, but if you could say just a little bit more about the religious dimension.
One of the things that we always thought about, assumptions we had about religious peacemakers, was that they were driven by religion. Religion and faith was important to them. That somehow they must be using religion for peace in their work, and that probably they were involved in religious conflicts. And when we applied our criteria and selected the peacemakers, we began to learn that these assumptions are not necessarily true. What is true is that they were all motivated by faith. What wasn't true is that they were always involved in a conflict that somehow was implicating religion. And what wasn't true was that they were necessarily using purely religious techniques. We found that some of their techniques were a mix between religious and secular, and some were religious, and some were purely secular. So, to give 3 examples, a purely religious technique would be teaching a girl in Afghanistan to read the Quran and understand that women should be literate and should be respected, so that they use that to convince their families to respect them and allow them maybe to work. That would be, I think, using a religious technique. The power of the pulpit, on its face, is a religious technique. You have a member of the clergy, or of some religious tradition, standing at a pulpit or giving a Friday prayer talk and using their authority as a religious leader. Well, when Chencho Alas did that, he was a priest, he no longer is, but he was at the time, and he stood behind the pulpit. He used it to organize the peasants so that they would seek land reform and go together and march together for land reform and protest for a political, economic end, not per se a religious one. And then there are the purely secular, like Najiba, who I mentioned, and Osna. They are educators, and what they did was bring the students together. They didn't necessarily talk about religion, although sometimes they might have, but mostly kids were painting murals, or they were taking the children from the 2 communities and bringing them to a residential center for the elderly, where in pairs the kids would go to the older people and draw with them and talk to them and try to cheer them up. A secular technique by 2 religiously driven women seeking peace. So it's very complicated. There is an overlay, and that's why it's important to recognize the religious peace builder, not silo them, but make sure that they are understood as part of peace building writ large.
Yeah, maybe just add a couple of things related to the inner dynamics of a peacemaker who is motivated by their own religion or faith. I think there are inner beliefs that we have that have a great deal to do with what we're going to do with our life, how we will handle discouragement and difficulty, and so it becomes the inner care system. And so a religiously motivated peacemaker needs to have that kind of system of inner care and to question oneself as to what do I really believe. When I was being raised in Mississippi, it was not the common belief that blacks and whites were equal, but my theology that I was being taught said we all were. And so those beliefs inside led me to serious questions and conversation in my family that then led me to a place of being able to stand against some of the cultural things.